activities with your peers and colleagues across campus who have requested that. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen to tell you a little bit about our group and how we came together.
Good. Well, thank you, Sam. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're off to a good Friday. We've made it through like almost another week of classes, right? We kind of just keep on plowing through. So today is really just a conversation about our group's journey and trying to make our teaching a little bit more inclusive, looking at some equity, how we can make sure or at least be more aware of some equity issues we might have in our own classes or some challenges that we have. Our journey was tied initially to student success. So Joanna, Andy, myself, we all have EDGE grants through the Provost Office, which is enhancing gateway design courses, something I have it actually, I should look at my notes, enhancing the design of gateway experiences. And so we've been focused on trying to improve success rates in large enrollment courses, specifically in the STEM fields. I've done it for a few years. Andy and Joanna are a little ahead of the game. And then we started talking with Ben Wu. Ben wanted to explore this, I think, in a little bit broader sense. And so, as Heather said, we did go to Los Angeles, California as a group. And that's actually the first time that we all met was summer of 2019, exploring kind of an intensive workshop. It was called Tides. It's down there at the bottom of your screen. It was teaching to increase diversity in equity and STEM. And so Joanna is from chemistry. She teaches large enrollment chem courses for engineers and also non-engineers. Andy teaches large enrollment. As you can see, he's in Reed Arena right now. He teaches large enrollment biology. I've taught large enrollment math classes. I have a lot of colleagues that teach large enrollment math classes, and Ben teaches large enrollment ecology courses. So Sam is the glue that keeps us all together and keeps us organized and poses I think, some challenging questions. And so today is really just about our journey and what we've done. We have met every other week. So every 2 weeks we've met for the last year and a half. We've looked at readings. We all joined a MOOC that was really, I think, a very nicely done MOOC. To get certificates for completion of that. And we've just had real conversations about some of the struggles that we've had related to equity, inclusion in our courses. And so today what we want to share is just kind of where we started and how our mindsets may have changed and kind of where we are and where we still need to go. So we're not experts in the field. I think that we want to make that clear. This is not our area of research. As a matter of fact, for me, it's quite actually orthogonal to what I normally would do. And so it's been, you know, a stretch for me in some of these to really think about equity, particularly in mathematics. So you're going to hear a little bit about the journey on it. So at this point, I think I hand it over to
me. I come back
to tell a little bit more about our goals and where we're headed.
Yeah, really, I'm going to echo what Jen said. None of us are experts in this. We've just been curious. And so we come with a very novice open hand in all of this, where that leads us into two, where what we've really worked with within our group of 5 and what we want to encourage this morning is to really develop a safe space where we can all be honest and say, we don't know how to do this. And we've got a lot of kiddos in our class. And so it really allowed us to have some difficult and real raw kind of conversations about how do you be inclusive within biology and chemistry and STEM or whatever your field is. Really, how do we do this? And so what we want to do is invite you in that conversation today. And if this is something that you're interested in, we're actually looking for others to join us starting spring of 21 to take a 2-semester deeper dive into and looking at this inclusive teaching piece, which would really do some soul searching spring of 21, do some course thinking over summer, and then do some implementation in fall. So just keep that in the back of your mind. If this is something you've been curious in as well, we'll be looking for others to join us starting in the spring, and then to share that we've put together some resources that we have found to be very beneficial that we've put into a Google folder that we'll make sure everybody gets access to in case that's something you want to dive in deeper on your own as well. And so please know that, again, we're not experts, but what we're structuring the conversation around today is one of the most helpful pieces that we have found, which is the Chronicle of Higher Ed's advice guide on how to make your teaching more inclusive. So there's 3 main principles we're going to open with, and then that's really what's going to launch our conversation. And so you're going to hear Ben, Andy, and Joanna talk a little bit more about each one of these principles, and then that's going to be the springboard for what we then carry the conversation around with this morning. And so if you'll indulge us a few more minutes, I'm going to hand it over to Ben to start with what we learned is one of the main principles for attacking inclusive teaching. But to do that, AQ has a really nice video that I wanted to share. It's just not even a minute long, but it really helps frame what we're talking about this morning.
It's important to recognize this. The bottom line is learning, helping students to learn, to acquire knowledge. And we don't want to put any blockages, impasses, or things that are going to be difficult for them to deal with. And so if you create a situation where people are going to be more focused on the insensitive language you use or the way that you don't recognize the heterogeneity within any particular group, that's going to block the learning process. So really, you want to do all you can to reduce that. And so being open to suggestions, being willing to look at new viewpoints, being willing to change over time, I think that's going to be so critical, and that's going to be even more critical as this world, the country, the classroom becomes more diverse.
Okay, as Sam shared, that article we start with, we thought was really helpful to us, the beginners. And the first one is about inclusive teaching. Is really about a mindset, or how do we change our mindset. So this is one piece of material that we studied when we were at the Institute. It was really helpful to us. So maybe some of you are familiar with this, but if you're not, maybe you can just take a look at this and see what do you notice? I'm sorry, I cannot see the bottom of the screen. And what do you wonder? So this one, the purpose of this one is try to illustrate the difference between equality and equity. And as teacher, we often think about we really need to be fair to everybody. But we oftentimes don't go further than that to think about what that really means. What's the implication of that? So this is to try to illustrate that when we have an equality, but we have people differ. We have different situations, and that really does not work well for everyone. And sometimes there's really important reasons, and for reasons out of control of the individual. And when we treat everybody the same, and they don't get to learn well or grow as they should be. So a few of the things I think that's related to the mindset piece that's important. We should think about it, and our group talk quite a bit about this as well. And as kind of implied in the video we watched earlier, what do we do as educators in our classes, even the very large classes? We're really doing is trying to facilitate the learning and the growth of all of our students. One quote from the article, and it's kind of, again, going to this, is for every teaching decision you make, ask yourself, who is being left out as a result of this approach? Another discussion many of us had before is that the larger mindset change may be still going in general among us academics, especially in the research institutions. Our traditional kind of philosophy or implicit approach, thinking about our education, things what we are doing, is really more of a talent selection. We want to identify the best, the brightest student with most potential and make sure they succeed. And education, higher education as a whole has changed quite a bit as well. And many people may argue that our work is not just about talent selection. That's a piece of that. But really more fundamentally, it's about talent cultivation, is to help all the students. And with that, and there are quite a bit of research, and many people argue, and teaching to a large degree is really about building relationships, because that makes a world of difference for students, and all of them. Some of them may be already doing well, they may not as dependent on that, but for many others, the sense of belonging and recognition and so on is really critical for their success, for their being able to engage and do well, to learn, to grow. And in order to get there, as educators, we really need to really understand who are ourselves, right? The multiple dimensions of ourselves. And in similar framework, to understand our students. Who are the students in our classes? What are their lives? What are their different situations and challenges? And that's necessary to inform the teaching decisions we will make, that will make a difference in their learning and growth. With that, I'll turn over to Andy.
Thank you, Ben. So the second principle is the more structure, the better for all students. And having taught introductory biology for now on about 15 years, for freshmen, usually first semester freshmen, one of the things that we find is structure is really important for student success and for all students, not just the high flyers, but not just the low flyers, but the high flyers. And the more you can do to frame that in your courses, the better and more inclusive you can be. And so I'm not going to hit all of the bullet points here, but one thing that is really important that we've adapted a lot of in biology is to give lots of low stakes quizzes and assessments. These are, we give homework once a week so that students know where they are, okay, that they're constantly engaged in the material. We give no stakes assessment during class periodically through, technological wizardry, right, through your iPhone. We can drop a question, ask, immediately assess what the knowledge of the student is, where they are in their understanding, and it gives them feedback. Did I understand what Dr. Tagg just said in class? And if not, I can address that on the fly in class. That doing those low stake assessments and quizzes also reduces the stakes of those major exams. We still have, high stakes exams in biology. It's okay, but it gives students a chance to do a little learning on these low stakes assessments and prepare for the exam. Those questions that you can give help students, because if you give questions on on our homework questions, these are, as they say, typical test questions that they're experiencing routinely every week. So they know what they're going to expect when the exam comes, okay? And then be as clear as you can with your syllabus, what your expectations are in class. I try to be as transparent as possible in my teaching. Why do I ask you guys to do this? Why do we do think, pair, share in class? That's where I'm not doing the speaking. I'm requiring them to think and then come back and bring what they think about this subject. And then sometimes it's not correct. That's okay, but they can learn from that. And then always try to bring in current events. One thing that coronavirus has been terrible about is all this social distancing and me teaching in Read Arena. But one of the great things is I've had lots of tie-ins that I can use in biology, from epidemiology to how viruses work and what makes up a virus and evolution, and the list goes on. That grabs them. But having that structure is really key. And a lot will say, hey, that's hand-holding, right? You're telling them, your learning objectives every week. or every class period, this is what we're going to cover. This is what you should know for the exam. Sure, you could consider it that, but it's also helping those students know what your expectations are. So when they do take an exam, they can succeed. They know what's expected. So that's about what I'm going to say, I think, for right now. I'll pass it on to Joanna, and I'll have to hop out here in just a second.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the dangers of too little structure. And I think, you know, this towing the line between what we think are college expectations and whether structure means infantilizing students, and it doesn't, right? I think there is often that common perception that building in too much structure may be too much of a crutch that hurts students, and the truth is it's absolutely not. And then the other part that's really important is that it's the structure that leads students towards becoming self-regulated learners. So Andy, Jen, and myself teach first semester freshmen. So this is a very, very high stakes semester. And if we're honest, it's not the chemistry skills or the math skills or the biology skills that matter. It's them learning how to become self-regulated learners and reminding yourself that there's a good reason, for instance, why kindergarten is incredibly structured, right? And I mean that with no disrespect to our students, but if you get that wrong, if you don't get all the kids counting to 10 and whatnot, then there's incredible problems that can come out of that. And so I think the common perception in science in particular, where there's sort of a hazing and this was tough and I went through it, now you're going to tough it out and go through it, leads to people not having very, very structured classrooms. So the things that we had to learn to get comfortable with are things like having silence in the classroom, building in time where you can wait for people to think, and then say it's okay to share, right? Again, in science, there is very much a culture of you do it on your own, right? It's a culture throughout every level in academia. It's not even encouraged in some cases to collaborate, right? You do everything on your own. So building that saying that it's okay to share, walking around, talking with students during class so that you're part of the group. Describing how you discuss things. So you have to teach how to ask good questions and how to give good answers. And you have to explain to get buy-in from everybody in the room that good leaders have to have both those sets of skills. Allowing for anonymous participation. So if you're a student who feels that they're out of their depth or who is feeling imposter syndrome, how do you let that student have their voice heard? Well, there's lots of ways you can. I'm really liking the Zoom chat for that, right? I think I'm hearing from different students in Zoom chat that I would have ever heard from before. And sometimes they chat with me and say, please don't read out my name when you read this to the class. And so then I can do that for them if they want to. But those are students who wouldn't have raised their hand. Or if I walk around my classroom of 300 and talk to people, they will ask me something that they maybe wouldn't have asked. And if you tell them that if you have a question, at least 50 other people in this room have that question and you're helping them, then you start to give them a sense of agency. The other really important thing is to work on self-perception. And so what is the role of the student and the role of the faculty member? So I have started saying my job is simply to help you succeed. You define what your success is, and my job is to help you get there. Not my job in this first year STEM course is to weed you out and see who can make it and who can't, right? Which is very often the message that students used to get from that. And within that, then lots of structure about how you do succeed in a STEM course. And then the other important part of that in terms of self-perception is how do you let them know that they're improving? That's incredibly important, right? If they only have an assignment, as Andy said, every several weeks, how can they possibly know? If you're flitting from subject to subject at lightning speed, which we sometimes have to do in these service courses, then that can be very, very hard. And the last piece is to figure out how to connect with the students, right? You may have very little in common with them, but there is a shared common human experience. So if you're having a tough day, it's okay, I think, for them to see that you're having a tough day. To get rid of this misperception that faculty members are academically infallible, that they never had a C in college, things like that. So you can talk about my first college test disaster, whatever it is. And then when they talk to you, to let them know that you hear them. When they come in your office, to not ask them first, what test score did you get on your test? Or what are you struggling with? But hey, who are you and where are you from? And oh, that's interesting. I have this in common with you, or that in common with you. Talking about your preferred pronouns, right? That lets people know right away who you are. So these are all things that we think of. And I think the kindergarten analogy is a really, really good one. And it's something that I try to keep in mind all the time, because it's a very, very high stakes game for us in terms of students leaving STEM altogether because of the way that they felt in their first semester of college. Go ahead, Sam. So we have put together, Sam, I should say, has put together a really nice Google folder full of resources. So the Chronicle of Higher Education has a really nice and not too long article with lots and lots of embedded links on how to make your teaching more inclusive. And that's been a little bit of the outline that we followed from that article so far. There's the scholarly teachers on becoming a more inclusive educator. The Columbia MOOC we have all been really enjoying, and we will go through that again in our learning community in the spring. AQ has an inclusive teaching practices toolkit, and there's the Academic Impressions Inclusive Pedagogy Training. So you can link, and we will make those links available to everybody today through the Google folder that Sam has put together. So we're looking forward to having people join us this spring. So we want to reach out to you and have you let us know if you think this is something that you would like to be a part of. We want to have those tough conversations. We want to be very, very introspective, and we want this to be a safe place where we can have those conversations. And we have a really, I think, nice group of people to work with. So you have people who are constantly worried about massive programs, that's Jen, Andy, and I, and sort of operations side of things. And then really great accountability coaches in Ben, who keeps us on track in terms of thinking about mindset issues and coming from the mindset angle and not just the operations angle when you have thousands and thousands of students to worry about. And Sam, who just keeps us accountable in terms of keeping us on track. So because of them, we're a very well organized group. And I think we will enjoy expanding out this group. So I think, is that it, Sam? Is that the last slide?
Yes, so I'm going to stop sharing and just open it up and see thoughts, impressions, ideas, because like we said, we are not the experts here, but those three principles have really guided. I know some of us struggled at first that, you know, how do you even begin to be an inclusive teacher? And so just taking in and parsing out and thinking, okay, baby steps, how can I do this? And so that's where we started with just, it's a mindset. And it's, because I know Jen would always say, how do I make math more inclusive? It's 2 + 2 is 4. And so she's laughing now because that's something when we all went to Tides, we were just, we didn't know. And so now that we've had this experience, we can come at it from a little different perspective. And so that was the presentation-y part. I apologize. I know that's not the normal gig here at Conversation Cafe, so I'm going to quit and open it up and see, Heather, if we had any questions, and then I know Ben and Jen, Joanna would be more than happy to share some of the things they have started doing, but he dropped off. I know he's got to go teach, but go for it.
So there were comments as we went along, and then you guys would answer them. So I think we pretty much caught up with them. I think part of it was getting the materials and that kind of thing. I did wonder how large the community you plan to have is, and
so
and then,
we are looking for 8 to 12 folks who are interested, and what it will really look like is every other week with us in the spring, going through Columbia's Inclusive Teaching MOOC. We have, like I said, about 8 to 12 folks, whether we can be one big group or we split into 2 smaller groups, but we have the capacity for up to about 12. And so what we'll do is we'll get the list from Sandra after this, and we can email out and let folks then respond back to us should they be interested, and we can go at it that way. And so we really didn't know how to gauge even people's interest in it. And then with that, we'll move forward. So
Do people have to have large classes to participate?
that is something the group has really struggled with. Do you have to be STEM? Does it have to be large? When we went to Tides is teaching to increase diversity and equity in STEM. And really where the heart of this group is that Andy, Ben, Jen, and Joanna do teach large courses. And so really to help with them with their journey, we have focused on large courses, and not to say that folks couldn't learn along the way. That's just who we are and where we're coming from. And so I'm not sure that I'll quit and let Ben and others chime in.
And it'd be nice to define large in this context, just so we're all understanding.
Yeah, so I think our thinking was that we want to make a first step, right? And partly it's biased by who we are. And another rationale is that large classes are probably some of the more difficult places to really implement many of these things. And so we thought it would be, if we have a group who has these common challenges, and maybe in a way that can work better. And so that's where we are thinking at this point. But if we need to modify that, we can certainly entertain that.
Okay, so hi everyone. First of all, that has been quite a nice presentation. I really enjoyed seeing, particularly that picture was very informative, I would say, Ben, and it's very nice. And that sort of triggered an idea in my mind, which is, yeah, I had precisely the question whether or not you need to be teaching a large class, but there are some other folks or units in the university that provide support to very large classes. And I think that if we are to rely more and more on this type of support, then we should think about inclusiveness also in the support structures that are being offered. So in particular, some of those structures, of course, I'm talking in my particular case about the Math Learning Center. We are capable of developing material that would foster equity, right? As you know, the different needs of different groups can provide a certain level of material or support that would give you a head start or a companion, a special bicycle that would allow someone with a certain level of need to catch up with everybody else, right? So and so that is just a comment that perhaps this can be broadened to the extent that you see this not only from the perspective of those teaching the large classes, but those aiding in making those classes successful. So that's just a comment.
So I want to address a question in the chat from Chave Carr. So she says, lots of formative low stakes quizzes means my average is much higher this semester. Is that fair to previous students? So I think in particular in the spring, that happened to a lot of us as we changed things as we went online. And this is something that I've thought about a lot. I think one thing that we're forced in STEM often to realize is that there probably was no good reason or rationale for the averages or things that we had before. It was just what was done. There were sort of target GPAs, and we weren't thinking a lot about it. And what I started to think was it fair what I did in the past? And then I think that's sort of my guiding principle now. Actually, it's not what I'm doing now, it's what I did in the past and what did I leave out in the past.
I would agree wholeheartedly with what Joanna said, in that just because your average has always been that way doesn't mean it's right. And it may be offend some people by saying that, but by helping students grow, you're actually fulfilling your mission as an educator. And if that means your average is higher and you've met all of the outcomes for your course, that's fabulous. You know, that's success. you should be happy about that, right? So.
Yeah, so I think that this also brings up a kind of a question that I don't know if the word is struggle with, but I often come back to this question. And the question is equal fair, right? So is giving everybody the same thing, doing the same thing the same way year after year, is that what fair is? Or is fair adapting to the situation that you're given at hand, right? So, and I don't have an answer to the question. I'm just kind of throwing something out there, in that the situation is very different now. And so I feel like if we don't adapt to the situation, then we're not having an inclusive equity lens in our teaching. So what I do right now in my teaching is not what I was doing at this time last year, because the environment is different. And so I think that that's kind of more the philosophical question. And I talked a lot about this when I taught teacher preparation, actually, in Aggie Teach, and trying to give assessments, particularly in math, right? So this journey has been very difficult for me, in the sense of trying to get an equity lens in a math classroom when I need everybody to come in with some certain skill set. And what do I do with somebody who doesn't have that skill set, right? And I think that that's where that is equal fair. So if I'm giving everybody the exact same assignment, am I taking into consideration the person at all, and where they come from, and how can I make that, what can I offer that student to try to bring them up to where I am? So I think that those are some questions that I've always gone back to when I start to struggle with these things, like, well, if a student got an A last semester and a student gets an A this semester, are those the same A's?
So another question to ask is, so my painful journey was to look at my data. So I run a program with about 6,000 freshmen in it in the fall. And so I had to sit down, because it hurts, right? You say, I'm the fairest person of the world. I want to believe that I am colorblind. I'm seeing everybody and all the things that they need. I am a good quality teacher. So then you look at the data, and one of the things, math is a big part of chemistry. And one of the things you say is, what am I supposed to do when I have students who come in ready for calculus and students who are struggling with basic algebra? How is that my job to figure that out? And is it my job to level them all up in the first 4 weeks in college? So that is really hard, and we need to support faculty in helping them do that. So then I dissect out my data, and I say, well, it's not my fault. It's that perhaps that more of my minority and first generation students come from backgrounds which are disadvantaged, and they don't have the math skills. It's not my fault that they're struggling in math. So then I dissect out my data, and I look at all the students above a certain level of a math placement exam score, which I deem to be totally fine for them to do in chemistry. And then I look at the data, and guess what? If you're white, you get an A much more easily than if you're first gen, or if you're minority. And if you're at the intersection of those two groups, you don't do well at all as compared to the others. So that's like the stab in the heart moment, and it's not about me and my heart, right? But that's the thing that you have to start thinking about. And then you ask yourself about equality and equity and what's fair, right? Because somehow despite my best efforts, I'm not giving those kids an equal opportunity to succeed. So it is part of our experience together in the spring will be to look and dissect some data, and it is eye-opening and scary, but I think in particular for those of us in STEM who love numbers, something that you can't ignore or hide from. So I'm wondering if anybody else in this group has actually done that, has dissected their data, or do you even know where you can get that data? Because I actually didn't know where I could get that data.
Your department ought to be looking at those data across the board when they.
Yeah, no, I know, but I think there's also socioeconomic markers you can get from, and I know because I've been in the advising world for a while, but a lot of people don't know that they can have access to that data.
I believe there's a DARS site that we can, that most people can access, but I might sit here and Google that for a minute.
Not at the course level, I don't think. So for instance, we now in chemistry have a basically get used to college kind of practice test 2 weeks in. and it gets people's attention. And then we don't tell them, but afterwards we say, okay, what did you learn from this? If you do better on exam 1, we will replace your grade on this quiz, right? So everybody gets treated the same. Nobody gets a special accommodation, and most of them can improve their grade, right, at all levels on the second one. Somebody maybe who took an AP chemistry doesn't really have any business in my class anyway. They're there. I'm not going to worry about them. I'm just not going to worry about it.
Well, and one thing that we're doing in our majors computer science intermediate course really is we're allowing the final exam to replace all of their exam grades. Mm-hmm. Because it is cumulative. It's a mastery teaching concept, right? So if they've kind of struggled in the beginning and figure it out by the end, and you give them a fair, exam that's not, it may not work in a course where the results aren't cumulative, but it allows for them to have hey, I messed up early on. I can really do well in the final exam and fix everything.
Michael, if I may kind of a follow up on that. Yeah, it's a really complex issue. There's no simple solution to that. And I think what you just mentioned, the final exam, that could work for many. And at least make it optional because some people just don't perform well in a high stress, kind of a high stakes situation. But I want to go back to earlier, you're saying, of course, in situation, there will be accommodation kind of a situation we'll have to think through. And it's messy, it may not be simple. But I think what Joanna and Heather mentioned earlier is really conceptually is about structural side of things of the whole course, what we can do to make it better. Just like in one of the universal design principles, they're saying if you make one piece that's better for these really struggling students, chances are that's beneficial. At least that will not hurt anybody else, but it will benefit many other people as well. Obvious example people often use is like on the curbs alongside the road when you have a handicap access, and it turns out so many other people using that. But I think in teaching really is over the years I realized maybe it's how we structure the course and certain practices or certain kind of a being of ourselves, how we relate to students that can make a difference for many students.
Okay, Paolo had his hand up.
Yes, so just touching the last subject a little bit. I mean, when it was talked about the chemistry class where students come in an algebra deficiency and so on, and this is where I guess there is a little. It's not a universal approach that you take here, that because some may not have that problem, but you can tailor some structure to address the deficiencies in the algebra and so on. And I think the ability of doing this tailored approach, and we have a lot of technology nowadays that we didn't have before, so why not use it, right? But my question, I raised my hand to ask the question of whether you've considered some forming groups of, say, students with a diverse background, and then have, gauge their sentiment, their opinion, and their suggestions about how they feel regarding your approach, right? So there are a lot of things that, all these incredible gaps in demographics that we have that sometimes we do not relate or really know what is impacting the success here. As you mentioned, some students from disadvantaged background can come with the same sort of measures, indicators of success that everybody else, and yet they do not perform to the same level of what it expected. And sometimes it has nothing to do with your class, right? But all the factors that are surrounding them in the institution as a whole, or the community, or their lives, or something that really impacts that demographic group, and you have no idea why it impacts them unless you really have this dialogue with them. So no matter how much I try to change my class and I become sort of the best, the most effective, the most inclusive, instructor, unless everybody else around me is trying to do the same, you know, we're still going to have the same group of students perhaps impacted even in my class, because some things are extraneous to that class. So I think this is a dialogue that we need to broaden, and also bring in those who are trying to help to hear what they say.
Joanna, you want to share your survey, beginning of semester survey? Kind of
Yeah,
practice?
so I thought one thing I want to answer one question in the chat. It says, does the access to the data for individual students sometimes influence your interactions? So the answer is no, because you never look at it till after the fact. It's just not a good idea to do that. So everything I would do retroactively after grades are turned in and everything else. So there's lots of low-hanging fruit things that you can do that can make a difference. So an idea I think that both Ben and I had liked when we went through our MOOC course was an idea from Brian Dewsbury, who's a biologist. I want to say somewhere in North Carolina, I've forgotten.
Long Island.
Long Island. So what he said was he liked the NPR series where people tell about themselves. And so this semester I just decided to do a tell me about yourself survey. Now I have 800 students and I've been trying to write personal little notes back to each of them that turned out not to be a good idea because I'm a little overwhelmed. But I have a video which tells about myself, and then I say, now tell me about yourself. That took me like 3 minutes to put together in eCampus. I put some bonus points on it because unfortunately that's the way it goes with freshmen sometimes. But I asked them what their concerns were. Tell me something about yourself, what your concern, how much chemistry have you had in the past, and what are your concerns about this semester? And a lot of them said something about online education, because in our large service courses, we are doing a lot of online education. And so that's really good because it gives them a voice. And then if they said something about themselves, I tried to relate, or some of them said, oh, hey, my sister went to the same college that you went to, or things like that. So that was really easy. That took me 0 effort to do. So I think one thing we could do is brainstorm about things like that that are very low hanging fruit kind of ideas. Does anybody else have any ideas?
Well, so in one class I taught before, but the first assignment for the students on eCampus, first day of class, was to tell about themselves, to tell what in a teacher they find most conducive for their learning. So what kind of teacher you think is more effective to make you yourself? So what do you think about learning? What draws you into mathematics? So what you like, what you dislike, and what is you feel really strong about. And it's things like that, questions. And the response was very positive. The students, some were thanking for me for being concerned about that. And they all had different ways of describing how they learn. But that drew them sort of into the classroom very effectively, I think. And also it was very informative for me to start the class.
So we've got some good dialogue in the chat. Some person pointed out, because someone brought up focus groups before, I think it was Paulo, that focus groups work well, but it's better if the faculty member or the instructor doesn't do it themselves, because then it opens up the dialogue.
Once you see really harnessing the power of your students. I know a lot of you teach really large classes, and that's where the power of things like think, pair, share come in, because you can't feasibly walk around to all 300 students, but Katie mentioned creating structure for student-to-student teaching and really harnessing the power of your students, and which I know cuts down on the time they would hear you teaching. But it's amazing, sometimes the students can say it just a little bit differently than you do, or they can anticipate where their other peers are struggling and be able to say it is a little bit differently. So that's another nice way to bring some inclusive to a really large class and even a small class, but really harnessing that. So Katie, thank you for mentioning that.
I have a suggestion as well. One thing that you can do so I put in the chat early on that I was 14 years into being a university professor before I really recognized that I was a champion of equality. And I thought I was doing, I mean, I went to all the CTE workshops, I did everything, you know, And then, it was all about how I made the rules explicitly clear and everything, that it was a contract between me and the students in my syllabus and all this stuff. And then I became a posse mentor. And what that meant was I sat across the table once every other week from students who come from urban areas, who are here on merit-based scholarships because they worked really hard to get here, right? They're leaders and they're meritorious in their academic pursuits prior to coming to college, but they're hit pretty hard when my posse was STEM, and 6 of them were in the E part of STEM, and they were facing a brand new change in that curriculum that was going on, and there was just a lot happening all at once while they were figuring out college. And some of them had, no lie, in a given semester, you know, like 3 or 4 different learning management systems and clickers and kind of all these things going on at once. And for the first time in my life, I saw a student as a student. And I know this is crazy because I can't even believe I was this way before, but I saw a student as someone who had all these things to contend at the same time and didn't understand how college worked and didn't have a parent who could help them understand it, right? And so that maybe isn't all of our students, but the crime of these kids who have this full ride scholarship, who have to use their credits in such a way as to get true advantage from that full ride scholarship to finish, right? Having to Q drop classes because they were so overwhelmed, just brought it home to me. Now, being a posse mentor is no joke. So I'm not saying go do that unless you really want to, but you know, you could be part of a Hullabaloo U group where you really ask the students how they're doing and get a sense of what it's like to be a freshman nowadays. Or you could go to Posse Plus retreats and sit around and talk to those students about how they're sending money home to their families, or they're, you know, just what a different experience they've had then. And I was a poor kid, scholarship kid going through college, and I thought I had a no joke experience, right? And these kids, the stuff that they were coping with just totally blew my mind open. And then I thought, well, how do I know who's in my class, right? So I just really encourage you to figure out if you, if part of what you need to do is stretch your sensibility around, well, if I change my class, it might not be fair to others that had it in the past, or things like that. You know, part of it is just stretching that mindset like they talked about, and just recognizing that having been wrong in the past doesn't mean you shouldn't change going forward, right? So
I think things like equality mean like I have this many office hours a week and it's open to everybody. Equity means explaining that what office hours are, that you can come, that you don't have to have a very, very specific question, right? There are lots of students who don't know that. So my kid calls me from college and says, I'm worried about something. I say, go see your professor, right? There are plenty of students who just don't even know that that's really an option, despite the fact that you say on your syllabus that I have office hours. So it takes saying, I love office hours. It's a favorite part of my day to interact with my students, you know, and things like that. Please stop by sometime so I can get to know you. Little things like that, right? That's not changing the integrity of your course in any way.
my posse literally thought, and they had told each other, that you had to sit there for the whole hour if you went for office hours. Mm-hmm. So think about that. If we did not have the discussion where we uncovered that, and then we spread it to the whole posse groups because we were afraid that they all thought that, right? It totally changed how they approach things. There's a hand up, Tiana.
Okay, sorry. Hopefully I won't go too far back because it was a comment on what I think it was Joanna said, gave an example of the kind of video introduction, which is something that I think is recommended in this type of online environment. And I just wanted to give feedback that I think that is a helpful idea to be inclusive of all students, you know, not just those who come from underrepresented groups. I have some feedback. We're all doing our best this semester and trying to figure out how to do this online class. And some feedback that I've received from someone who's doing an asynchronous class is that there is like zero engagement. So like they get to hear the voice of their professor and see slides, but there's no engagement with the professor. There's no engagement with the other students. And so their experience in this class has not been the experience that we would hope that they would have. And so making them feel included in the class in some way, having some sort of engagement or try to engage to make them connect, discussion boards or whatever it is, the video. I mean, I think that would have really been nice. They would have seen the professor's face and maybe help to be more engaged, included in the class.
I agree that that's, communication is key. And I myself even reach out and try to adjust using the 7 learning styles, visual, spatial, linguistic, interpersonal. In small classes, it's easier to reach out to students and bridge that gap of communication. If you could just email them and get some feedback from them on maybe what type of learning style they, identify with. But on these large classes, just making sure communication is, you're on the same line as your TA, as the instructor, because, the old learning methods was text driven. And then we slowly, went to PowerPoint, and now it's more social, interactive, and a lot more, adaptation is involved just to bring the communication up to a level, no matter who the student is and what their culturally identifiable background is, and just get everybody on the same level that we can just, effectively communicate.
Going back to what was said earlier about, just making things explicit about what office hours are for. I was on I'm in a access computing group that's based around the whole country, and we had a student panel one day. And so before I say what we got from the student panel, I'll tell you something that used to happen to my class a lot, is that students would come in that had disabilities, and they would try to do the first exam without getting their accommodations, because I guess they've had bad experiences with the professors not, being open to accommodations. And then after the first exam, they're giving me their accommodations because it's a challenging exam and they need their accommodations, right? So what I have started doing is I explicitly talk about accommodations letters in my startup of the class, saying, I would prefer that you get your accommodations and not need them than find out that you need them and not have them. And try and make it very clear to them there will be no negative consequences for them, submitting their letter. And that's a thing that in that student panel they were saying, is that if the professor explicitly addresses that in their syllabus and in their class, they feel more comfortable going forward. And they actually said they want to see more than the boilerplate ADA statement in your syllabus. And to be honest, I had not been doing that. So now what I'm doing is I'm still keeping the boilerplate, because we all have to have that, but you can add a paragraph beforehand kind of saying, hey, I really think this is important. And now I actually have what I used to say in class, I'm putting that explicitly on my syllabuses at this point.
That's excellent. So I've been serving on a committee that's looking at modified attendance agreements with students, which are part of the disabilities office. It's a federal law that if someone is deemed it's necessary for them to have modified attendance because of whatever their circumstances are, that you're supposed to accommodate their need to the best possible. But, I think so many of you have probably had this happen where they approach you and they give you this relatively blank form where you're supposed to talk about what you're willing to do with them. And I feel so much for especially freshmen who are sent out into the world to have these conversations with faculty without a lot of guidance. So we were trying, and I believe the forms are a bit better this year, that it's a little bit more guided, but we don't have an infrastructure that is sufficient to have someone accompany that student to have a conversation with the faculty member. But the students that were on the committee spoke of the negative experiences they had having to do this themselves, and the kinds of ways that faculty treated them, that it was horrifying to me what what they ended up experiencing. And the original document literally said it is federal law that we must, you know, kind of do this. So I think it's a great point. We were trying to recommend in the conversations, we kind of leaned away from this eventually, but one thought was, can we talk to this faculty senate about making a recommendation for faculty faculty fitting their syllabus to what do you do, letting students know what you are willing to do for modified attendance, right? Because if they're already deemed as needing modified attendance, why not make that the policy in your syllabus? This is what I do for modified attendance. So give that some thought when you design your course. Like, what are you willing to, are you building it in such a way that if they need more wiggle room, or like I have an example in my class, I have quizzes every week, but the answers to those open up after 24 hours after they close, right? So they only have that 24 hours to ask for a little bit of an extension on that quiz, right? And then I don't have it, or I have to create a different quiz or something for them. So what about my course is set up in a way that doesn't allow me to do modified attendance for someone who really needs it?
So when I think about the conversation that we've had so far this morning, you know, it kind of all, there's a piece of student relationships in it, right? And that is one of the parts of the principles that we have studied over the last year and a half. And that has been actually one of my biggest takeaways, is that it's really about letting students know that I think of them as a person and not as somebody, you know, like you come into my class and this is the way we do things and you conform to me and this is the way it's going to be. It's really having them genuinely feel like you see them as a person, right? And so there are some little techniques that I'm really conscientious now about in my teaching, just to try to make them, and I'm not portraying an image, it's really an effort of trying to make them see that I see a person in there and not just somebody that's coming and taking up some space in this classroom. And one of them is getting to know their names. And so your name is one of the most identifying factors of you, right? So when I say Heather in a store, she will turn around because she knows I'm talking to her. And so when we don't recognize them as their name, then they get a feeling sometimes, or an image can be portrayed that we don't really see them as a person. We just see you as somebody taking up space in my classroom, and what's your question? Let me answer it. And that's a challenge in large classes, right? So if you have 300 or 100, or right now I've got 50 face-to-face and 50 online. And so how do we, you know, manage that? And I still do every day before they ask a question in class, ask them to say their name. What's your name? And they may say Heather. I'll say, okay, great, Heather, what's your question? And then if I come into class a little bit early, I'll ask them, you know, I'll kind of go down some rows. I'm like, remind me of your name again. I'm sorry, I asked you your name yesterday. I know that, but or the day before. So names and paying attention to names, using name tense, just something so that you recognize them as who they are, is one thing. And then I've also tried to be real conscientious about things that I say in class. And so for me in a math class, what may be easy for me is not easy for them. So, or when I say, now this is one of the harder concepts of the course, you know, then I think that they might be like, that's not for me. I can't do those, right? So just changing and tweaking the language a little bit. This is a complex topic, but if we work through this real hard, or if we work through this, we can make it, right? And so I think just thinking about the words that you say. And then the other thing that I've been real conscientious about, particularly in large courses, and I think if any of you are parents, you know this, right? So the younger sibling learns from the older sibling just by watching, you know, the discipline that the parent did to the older student. And this happens in the classroom also. So if I have a line of students that are waiting at the end of class to ask me a question, they're by nature of humans listening to those questions, and they are taking in my reactions and what I'm saying to them, right? So just this semester, a student, her name's Joanna, she came up to ask a question at the end of class, and I said, "Hi, Joanna, where are you from?" And she said, "I'm from Beaumont." And it happened to be like the day before that hurricane was hitting Beaumont, right? And I said, "Oh my gosh, where's your family?" And we had this like just real short conversation about that. And she was like, "Thank you so much for being concerned about my family." And it's just those types of things. When another student sees that happening, I think it opens the door for them. And I'm not sure, before going through some of this, I really realized the impact that those interactions can have on students, and then how that really can affect their learning as well. It's all connected, and it's just, I think, been fascinating to study that.
Just to piggyback off what Jen said, I know in teaching, it's super, it doesn't even cross our mind to spit out something like, "Oh, this is going to be hard," or this is really easy. But one of the things I started doing with my students is acknowledging, if you don't get this right now, that's okay. Just stick with me, and helping them with that perseverance and that grit, but acknowledging you may be lost right now, and that's completely okay. That's completely normal, but stick with me, and just putting in those little bits of encouragement to really, like Jen said, just to be cognizant of how they could be feeling, and then acknowledging that, but inviting them to stick with you, to stick with it, to keep going, keep trying, let's do one more. And just those little things along the way that they hear you recognize how they're feeling, it really can help get some, not that we're looking for buy-in, that's not the right word, but to keep them with you and to keep them going.
Can I just share something that I've done this semester that has been kind of like outrageously successful? I started to meet with some of my students who were struggling in the class, not necessarily because of the content, but simply because of the times, be it mental stress or whatever. And some of them have said, "Oh, I want to drop the class, I can't do it," kind of thing. I said, "Please don't drop the class, let's work through this together." And then I'll say to them, in the class, at some point in the class, just give me the thumbs up, and then I'll know that you're doing okay. And if I don't see the thumbs up, I'll, you know, we can talk after class, or I'll meet you or whatever. And I did this with a few of my students. And now the students have seen other students in the class giving me the thumbs up. And it's like they now know that they're not alone in struggling in the class. So since I started doing this, I originally told about 3 or 4 students about the thumbs up, and some of them wait till the end of class, and just before they sign off, they just give me the thumbs up, and then they end the they end the Zoom meeting. I'm getting more and more students give me the thumbs up, and it's almost like a secret wink where they wink at one another and they know that they're in this together. And then in the last 3 weeks of class, I've had more students coming to class than are actually enrolled in the class, which is really very weird. I have 54 students enrolled in one of my class, and I had 62 in there last week. And they're staying to the end, and then they're just going and logging off. And it's like a secret snaky wave that they're giving one another, but I now know that they're okay. It's really weird.
A large
But
class,
just that little bit of intervention just has made a huge difference.
That's beautiful.
So I was going to say, Heather, when you were talking about what can I do in my course that sets up for the modified attendance agreement. So I tried something to share on Katrina Laporte, something that's worked well. So I tried something that was suggested at the Canvas big launch. And one of the speakers had suggested, maybe it was a Canvas launch, but I heard it in the before the semester started, but she has a 24-hour contingency, no questions asked late policy. And I thought, well, this is an interesting semester to give it a try, because everyone's like juggling so many different things. So I'm trying it this semester. So what I have is my students know there's a 24-hour contingency late policy where all they need to do, they have 24 hours and they can use it as they want. I've just said, don't abuse it, which no one has. And the beautiful thing is, like, you can work this to your advantage. You can work this the way that you actually want things. So if you genuinely want things turned in on Sunday at 11:59, make it, you can play it, you can make it work to your advantage. But the nice thing is that the students realize, like, okay, well, I have this grace period. And I've had so many students will tell me my car broke down or something, like all the things that happen in life, especially in COVID life. And it's been really helpful because otherwise I'd get these requests anyway, and then I'd have to make a decision about each and every one of them. And so now I've made the decision and it's out there and I'm done. And the students know they have 24 hours to have an extra 24 hours if something's going on. And it's been really helpful. And I think that might play to this idea of equity and equality in our classes.
So if I may, I want to maybe go back to one of the earliest questions, because I had many conversations with colleagues that struggle with that one. Just want to bring back up and see maybe some of your thoughts. Earlier, one of the first discussions about average or grade distribution or grade inflation. And actually some of you already followed up on that, but I think that's a pretty large topic or concept we all deal with, and it's really important. And of course, whether it is fair or not to last year's student, that's a different question. And if there are things we need to mitigate, we do. But this is more fundamental, just why are we teaching? What's the purpose of this, right? If we really want students to learn and grow, and especially if we set learning outcomes, we say this is what they need to get. And why should we, how should we worry about grade distribution? And by the way, what's the purpose of the grade distribution? We want to separate student out. There's two different ways we can do that. Otherwise, if we actually have a concrete ways of learning outcomes where we really want to help them to get to, and does it make sense to say we got to have a high, like middle C to be the average and have a distribution in such a way? What purpose does that serve? I think I struggle with that over the years a bit, but I think that's one thing that really influenced many of my decisions, how to approach teaching quite a bit. I wonder if any of you struggle with that, and any insights about that?
I have a thought, and I'm curious to hear Katrina's, because we're in the same boat. So we did a CTE workshop on course-based or authentic assessment. And this question did come up because the distribution does change a little bit. So I now don't have exams for a variety of reasons, but one is because I'm teaching entirely online and I don't want to proctor or worry about proctoring. So I'm doing course-based assessment. And so my distribution is looking to be very bimodal. So if you're engaged and you're doing your work, then you're probably going to end up in the BA range. If you're not, then you're down in the CDF range. But what I am talking with some students about, because I meet with them when they come to my student hours or any of these meetings, and I ask them, like, do you feel like you're learning as much or you're studying as hard, and they say, I'm working harder, or it's as much because I feel like I have to know the things before I create a topic. So like what we'll do is we'll have video lectures for the week, and then I ask them, you need to go create something. You need to teach this to a friend and reflect on it. You need to create an infographic on this topic and reflect on it. And they have to know their stuff in order to do it right. And it's a different way of learning, but the distribution has changed, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I think it's reflective of what's actually happening in the course. So that would be my thoughts on that.
Katie, may I ask you to follow up? I was wondering, listening to you, this bimodal would actually make really good sense. In teaching large class service course over the years, early on I learned some student make decisions, say this semester I'm quite busy, here's 2 courses that's critical, I'm going to focus on that. Just gauge my kind of efforts to get a C in this ecology class on my elective. I learned to respect that. But in the meantime, I was wondering, say, in this lower mode of the distribution, how many of the students are in that case? And how many of them, as we were talking earlier, don't know what to do, they're actually struggle, and what we can do to reach them, how we find out that.
So I've discovered that as most professors might know that there's a group me associated with my class that seems to be an echo chamber. I tell my students that I'm not in there, but apparently they have started to send representatives to my student hours so that the representatives come speak about the concerns on the group me. So I think to some extent there are some students that might just be lost, but I try to make sure I send out announcements every week. I've actually made it so that between my TA and I, we have 1 hour of visitation with our students Monday through Thursday. So there's 1 hour on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday between my TA and I. So I try to make sure that I'm accessible and I'm explaining things along the way about how the course is structured. So I'm trying to do everything I can to make sure that they understand the structure. And at some point, if they have questions, they're going to need to come ask me. But there could be the chance that there are some students that are just lost. And that's why they're not doing well. It's hard to know in a class that's 200, 150 who that is. But the nice thing about Canvas, which I'm in now, is there's a feature in the gradebook of you can email anyone that doesn't do well on an assignment or doesn't turn something in. By just clicking one button, you can email all of them. And if you adjust the wording correctly, it will appear like you're checking in on all of them. So that's the nice feature. Like, it's a way that I can check in on everybody, but without having to send 50 emails. So that's how I'm managing it.
Can you address the difference in grading a course with no exams, Dr. Stoddard?
Yeah, so I adopted, Katrina and I had several meetings over the summer about this. And so the grading, there is more grading, I will say that. And I'm kind of shocked at the moment this semester between Canvas and COVID and a variety of other things. I'm close to my cap. But I'm curious to see what this will look like when my Canvas course is built and we're not living in COVID times. That will change things, but the way that I've set up my grading is that really it's a rubric of 100%, 80%, 60%, 0%. When I look at a weekly task they had to do, so one week they did an infographic, and so I look, and pretty quickly I can determine where they stand on that range. And I will say the rubrics in Canvas are not as nice. I don't really like using them as much as I did in eCampus, but you can move through it fairly quickly, but it is more intensive. It is more grading.
If there's any final remarks, I'd love to hear them, but otherwise I hope you'll come back next month, the first Friday of every month, 8:30 to 10.